Hey guys, in this video I'll give you my full Ebisu experience and everything I've been doing surrounding it. Let's get right into it. Our very first time being at Ebisu was the weekend of the Summer Drift Matsuri, and by the time I arrived, the Matsuri was already in full swing. From the entrance, the Nishi track is the closest, so that's what we checked out first. The main reason we came to the Drift Matsuri is because Clément invited me to come to watch him drive. Clément's the French dude living in Japan you might remember from my Tokyo video, whom I randomly met while cruising the Wangan and hang out with since. He was there with his mate Geoffrey, who I also call a buddy now. As you can see, Clément has another JZX100 here at Ebisu, but this one's a chaser as opposed to his street car, which is a Cresta. Both his cars are amazing though. Pretty cool considering this is the first drift car I ever sat in. Clément had to change tires, so we popped over to the shed and then drove up the hill to the probably single most famous drift track in the entire world, Ebisu North Course, also known as Kita. We then drove back down the mountain and rolled over to Toge for Maria to sit in a drift car for the first time in her life as well, which is quite funny because Toge is known to be the scariest of them all.
Ah, bonjour.
Are you okay? We took a break, got some dinner, and came back for some night drifting action. It was Matsuri after all. The night ended in an AE86 sending it a tad too hard and flipping the car, but luckily everyone walked away safely. We came back the second day and this day was all about Nishi. Today Joffrey also joined in a rented 350Z from Side X, so the boys were burning rubber all day in them crazy Nishi trains. In the end, everyone joined in, and there were like 30 cars on track at the same time. It was absolute madness, and something you have to witness at least once in your life if you're a drift fan. The next morning, bright and early, we headed back to Ebisu again, but this time there was no Matsuri. I'm gonna drift for the first time in my life. I've bought a JZX100 Mark II, so I could finally drift myself, for real. This car belonged previously to Cameron Das, an American race car driver, and the car is fully prepped to be driving at Ebisu. I got it with the guys at Power Vehicles, so if it needed anything, they're always around. Spoiler alert, it did need a couple of things. So then it was time for my nervous ass to get into the driver's seat and see if all the sim drifting has paid off. We gone down to Kurland and Clement gave me a couple of tips to start off, and then I went for it. With my hands a bit on the shaky side, I reconvened with the guys and they just told me to send it, even if I mess up a tiny bit. That felt incredible, and a few more sessions later I started feeling more and more comfortable. Those were still the old tires on the car, so first we swapped the rears to move on to school course. It's really cool because Power Vehicles has a shed setup with a couple of tire machines for their customers to quickly pop on tires themselves. Did I mention it was 30 degrees plus? You have to imagine school course being 3 big circles next to one another, and you can drive it in whichever configuration you like, as long as there are no other cars on track. At first I was pretty timid and spun a few times, but I got the hang of things at a bit more speed after a while and felt right at home. I was very impressed with the performance of the car, and god I freaking love the sound. The 1JZ is absolutely unrivaled. Next, we drove up to the restaurant to get some lunch. And let me tell you, with everything you experience here, this is some of the best lunch you'll ever have. And then it was time to graduate to the absolute dream of mine, Kita. I'm not going to bore you further with all my fails, because trust me, there were plenty, and I'll show you a few special ones later on. But for now, I'll leave this here. It felt like a dream come true linking up Kita for the very first time. Definitely bucket list item checked off the list. After every 2 or 3 laps, Clement told me to come in and run water over the tires, because you'd be able to make your tires last twice as long essentially. Again, over 30 degrees outside wasn't helping. We then climbed down to check the last track I would be able to drive that day. We drove over to Toga and Clement popped on my passenger seat, and we essentially went for a couple sighting laps. But apart from a couple of slides on a few corners, I was too much of a pansy to get into it. Another time maybe. And at that point it started raining, so we called it a day. And what a day it was. Apart from someone rolling his drift car into my R34.
So, yesterday was my first day drifting and it was crazy. I freaking loved every second of it. But someone rolled into my R34 while we were parked up at PV, and yeah, it cracked the rear bumper a tiny bit more. So what I'm gonna do now is take the rear bumper off, do some fiberglass work, and see if I can get it fixed up before painting.
While I was at it, I also added a couple of rib nuts to the rear bumper support bar so I can bolt the bumper down properly. On Wednesdays the tracks are closed, but you can still come to Ebisu to hang out and do maintenance on your car also. So that's what I usually did in the coming weeks. And when I was done, Maria and I would usually head out somewhere because Fukushima has so much more to offer than just Ebisu. I'm just kidding. This is the last up garage I'm gonna show you. Maybe. Let me show you where we were staying most of the time while we were in Fukushima. This is the Mountain Hotel, the absolute most popular hotel for Ebisu visitors. It's in a small place called Dake Onsen, and there is tons of hotels in this town. Or I should say used to, because most appear to be condemned due to earthquakes in fact. Maria and I actually experienced our first earthquake of our lives here. I think we caught like 3 or 4 level 2 and 3 earthquakes in total. It's an incredible picturesque town with a great onsen in the basement of the mountain, and we were super lucky because the yearly festival was exactly around the time we were staying. The Matsuri started off with the Taira brothers Seiya and Masato performing, who also run the local izakaya I frequented across the road and made friends with rather quick. And later on with the entire town doing traditional dances around the stage, enjoying themselves, having food and drink. Incredible experience.
Oh shit. So I came back to Ebisu to get some body work done before paint, but listen to that background noise. D1's training down at Nishi. And Minami is completely deserted. Well, I guess there's a couple of buses now this time.
I then got to work on the front bumper. There's one thing I really hate about R34s, when people don't get the panel gap right between the front bumper and the bonnet. And all of this being aftermarket, they weren't quite what I wanted, so I'm doing what I've done previously on my black R34. But this time I'm doing a full rubber seal delete as well, for science and all. I simply added a layer of fiberglass body filler that I can then shape with a body file. Turned out pretty damn good if you ask me. As you could probably hear, the pros were at Ebisu, and so the main event was held that weekend, which a snowball's chance in hell I was gonna miss. After watching the pros for the day, I was obviously keen to get back into the driver's seat myself. At this point I had several days of drifting under my belt, however this was the first day I had to do it in the wet. so I started back at Kurkurland.
Super tight.
First gear in the wet is not exactly the most challenging thing in the world, but it is fun nonetheless. I felt like there was not much more to learn here in the wet, so I rolled up to Kita, my new favorite place in the world. But that turned out to be a different kind of experience. On that day, me and Ben, a super cool dude from Australia, had the track for ourselves essentially. I must admit though, it wasn't the most enjoyable time to drift on Kita. When it's completely soaked, you go real slow, and when it started to dry up, you'd still get wet patches, and that's when it got me a few times. It's true that when it's wet, you have a quarter of the wear, and your tires last much longer, but you also have only a quarter of the grip. And when it's dry and wet at the same time, I really had my hands full trying to adjust. But when it became fully dry, things just started to flow again. Good experience in the end again, of course. Unfortunately, it continued raining the entire week, so on that Wednesday I sat down once again to get some stuff done on the Skyline. Takashi had received a couple of packages for me, and it was time to get stuff installed. I had tire ends with spherical bearings and geometry correction picked up early on into my Japan trip from a random up garage for like 10 USD. Used Kazama tension rods I purchased online on Kruber for around 35 USD, as well as brand new Kazama 25mm extended lower control arms. Turned into a bit of an ordeal because I had to walk uphill twice to get extra tools from PV, but it got done in the end. When it turned sunny again, believe it or not, I took a day off from drifting and drove into the nearby mountains. Admittedly, while filming, I was more concerned with how the Skyline started looking better and better, and is slowly getting to a point where I'm happy with the setup. But the actual reason we came is checking out this inactive volcano called Azuma Kofuji, as well as the Jododaira visitor center right next to it. First we got a nice bowl of ramen, and then began to climb up the stairs. The views are pretty spectacular, and the best thing is you always see other cool cars out and about. Not that I had eyes for anything else but the four-door that day. But not everything was sunshine and rainbows. On one fateful day where I just came to drive without filming, I was about 50 laps deep that day on Kita, and I cut the first corner a tad too much and hit a massive pothole, sending me off on the other side. The end of the story was that I had to get 2 new front wheels and a couple of things bent back into place. On one of the evenings, we had Maria finally given it a go, and she enjoyed it so much that we came back for her to have a full day on Kurkurland. I didn't film too much because I didn't want to stress her unnecessarily, but she was actually doing quite fine and was handbraking into donuts and was just enjoying herself. Just until this happened. But hey, we're down a headlight and a bumper, no biggie. That's drifting and these things will happen. I've done way worse, as you've seen. It was my turn again, and the cool thing was for our final days at Ebisu, Nishi was gonna be open for 2 days in a row. And the best of all was, together with a few Sidex guys and some locals, we had the track to ourselves. The bad thing was, it was completely soaked, but that didn't bother any of us. In the afternoon it started to dry up and get patchy again for some exciting driving. And on my very last run, well, let's just say third gear clutch kicks uphill are hard on any transmission here. Which is why my R154 decided to leave the chat. It's nice to have PV support though, who sorted me out with a new trans overnight, meaning I was right back the next day. Out of our entire time at Ebisu, this was my favorite. Not only did the car hold up throughout the day without any issues, but the weather has been great as well. I was contemplating to sell the car again after our trip at the time I bought it, but all that has changed. This car is a keeper and I will be back here. The cars, the people, the environment make this place so magical that I can't imagine not spending a ton more time here. Our very last thing we did in Fukushima was attending the Lantern Festival in Nihonmatsu. We were told it's in the top 3 biggest lantern festivals in all of Japan. These are real candles inside these lanterns, and it's said that there are 3,000 lanterns across the 7 floats. Whenever a candle burnt out or even ignited a lantern, it was quickly replaced, no matter if it was at the bottom of the float or at the very top. And they had to do this for hours on end, because they started early into the evening when it just got dark, and they continued to do this until like 10 p.m. Definitely a highlight event when coming to Japan, not just for cars, but also the culture. At this point we had spent several months in Japan, and we were about to head out for our biggest round trip across all of Japan. But that's gonna be in the last video of our tour. Hope you enjoyed this brief insight into life at and around Ebisu, and I'll see you next time. Bye.